very grateful to be with you. I'm grateful to Pamela Atkinson and for her kind introduction. I'm not really a warm person. I blame my Nordic heritage as being reserved. In Finland, my father's Finnish. In Finland, when COVID hit, and they were told that they had to socially distance 2 meters, in Finland they said, why can't we go back to our usual 4 meters? And it's this reserved sort of nature that's there. And it's true that I used to specialize in heart illness, but my wife would tell you that a specialist is someone that learns more and more about less and less till finally they know everything about nothing. And she would say, my field was so narrow I didn't deserve to call myself a cardiologist. And it happens to be true. But I'm grateful for everyone involved with the Utah Coalition Against Pornography, and I applaud the mission statement: empowering individuals, strengthening families, and uniting organizations in the fight against pornography through education and collaboration. UCAP is a model for the nation, and it shows that local efforts to coalesce around education and collaboration can accomplish remarkable things. I especially want to thank each of you for attending. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your willingness to be anxiously engaged in a good cause and do many things of your own free will to bring to pass much good. As Pamela mentioned, I've cheated, and I've invited these two remarkable individuals to help me. Mr. Gray has a master's degree in social work and is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in addictions counseling. And Dr. Jill Manning has a PhD in marriage and family therapy and is a licensed marriage and family therapist specialized in treating individuals who've been sexually betrayed through infidelity or compulsive sexual behavior. Mr. Gray and Dr. Manning will participate after I've made some preliminary remarks. The reason I'm so grateful for them is that I have no unique qualifications to speak to you. To quote the ABBA song, I'm nothing special. In fact, I'm a bit of a bore. And all of you are too young to remember ABBA, but that's beside the point. But I am aware of the profound hurt that occurs in the lives of those touched by pornography, by individuals who themselves view pornography, and their families and their friends. For those who are affected in any way, it can feel as though it constitutes a problem with no resolution. My message is that being impacted by pornography is not an impossible situation. There's hope, there's help, and there's healing, but it requires the right mindset, the right approach, and the right individuals to be involved. And to demonstrate this, I've asked Lisa Smith, who I met here today, to come up and help me using these nails that are here to my right. And what I'd like to do is to ask Lisa to do something impossible. If she has a seat there, what she has are 14 nails here to her left, and then there's one nail stuck in the board. And what I'd like Lisa to do is to take and balance all of those nails on the top of that nail. There was one.
I don't think this is going to...
And so it seems totally impossible, right? And so let me show you that it's not impossible. If you stand. And Lisa, why don't you go to there and just describe what I'm doing, okay?
Looks like he's putting one down, and then he's putting the others alongside, going outwards from it, going back and forth. Okay, he's going back and forth with on one nail that's positioned down on the table. He's going back and forth with the heads of the nails, back and forth going the other way across it. And then one more on top. And then he's lifting the whole thing up to move it over on top of that nail. Wow. Look at that. Wow.
The seemingly impossible is possible. And what we're going to do, I know this is a stretch, but I've asked Lisa if she'd do this. Take all those down again. I'll make disclaimers. And while we talk, she's going to work on this, and we'll see how we do. But you can attach symbolic meaning to each of these nails. There are two key nails, and those are the horizontal ones. And I'll let the lower one represent the individual who's affected by pornography. It could be the individual viewing pornography or the friend or loved one of the person viewing pornography. In other words, this bottom nail represents you and me. If we believe the situation is hopeless, well, it is. We need to believe that change is possible, that help is accessible, and that with that help, healing can occur. The symbolic meaning I attach to the second horizontal nail is based on my faith tradition. Start over. You can attach different things based on your tradition, but I'm talking about the symbolic meaning of the upper nail. It has to be something higher than you yourself. And the symbolic meaning I'll use represents Jesus Christ. He offers hope to the seemingly hopeless and help to those who feel lost. As I've come to know him, I've learned that he loves to heal wounds you cannot heal, to fix things that are irreparably broken, and compensate for any unfairness you've experienced. And he absolutely loves to permanently mend even shattered hearts. Whatever meaning you attach to the upper nail, both horizontal nails are crucial to accomplish the seemingly impossible. We'll keep working on it. The other nails may symbolize those around us who can offer hope, help, and healing. This includes trusted friends, parents, spouses, ecclesiastical leaders, mental health professionals, and organizations. All contribute to making the impossible possible. The theme of this conference is Things as They Really Are. I believe that individuals, marriages, and families can heal and overcome the ills of pornography when willingness, education, hard work, faith, and appropriate treatment coalesce. My church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I condemn pornography in any form. It damages individuals, families, and societies. It draws us away from God and impairs our ability to feel the influence of the Holy Spirit. Because all forms of pornographic material are unhealthy, opposition to its production, dissemination, and use is warranted. Intentional use of pornography is harmful, whether occasional or intensive. I'll present some simplified situations to Mr. Gray and Dr. Manning and ask them to comment. Their comments won't be exhaustive. They could take any of these comments and talk to us profitably for a long time. But they're going to just comment on an aspect or two, and then we'll move on. And the intent is to help us think hopefully about the situation. So case number 1. Bob is 16 years old. He's been viewing pornography frequently, and it's been interfering with his studies. He's never told anyone. He feels overwhelmingly ashamed of himself. Eventually, he musters the courage to tell his father and mother. If you were his parents, what would be the best way to respond? And if instead he confided to an ecclesiastical leader, how would you hope that leader would respond? And would your reaction be different, or should their reaction be different if we were a daughter and not a son? So please help us on that one.
Thank you, Elder Renlund. Hopefully, is this live? Can you
Yes.
hear me okay? Good. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you. Jill and I are very honored to be a part of this, and thank you for this invitation from UCAP. These parents have several things that they're needing to kind of hone in on right initially with the description of the situation. There are 3 major areas that I see as critical for the parents to be aware of. One is the frequency, and this is in the order that it's laid out in the description. It's the frequency that this young man has had in looking at pornography, which would indicate that it's probably more than the sexual release or the sexual experience that he's looking for. Probably has to do with other parts of his life that he's now developed, maybe a compulsive or addictive pattern because of other factors in his life, maybe self-medicating because of stress, depression, or other things that we can discuss as well. The other factor is the recognizing of the consequences that he's already experiencing. We already know that he's having trouble with his schooling, so these behaviors have probably then interfered with his ability to concentrate and study with his homework and be able to memorize, because he probably has other issues that are going on here too as well. Probably having difficulty sleeping, which is a very typical problem with those that are struggling with these behaviors. Probably then, because of the lack of sleep, more than likely he's showing some irritability in the family, probably being very edgy, irritable with his siblings, with mom and dad, having a hard time really then connecting with them. These are very strong factors that we usually see. Low interest probably in other things that he's been involved in prior to these events. Maybe he's dropped out of some of his sporting events or other extracurricular activities at school. And so the parents are needing to now, as they understand what he's then describing to them, important for them to be aware of these 2 factors. The third factor that I think is very important, probably the most important for them to zero in on right now, is the issue related to his shame. As it indicates in what Elder Renlund has described, he's feeling immense shame related to his behaviors. He's now come out of secrecy. He's probably had these behaviors very much embedded in his subconscious, not wanting to talk about them because of the feelings of shame that he would be experiencing, and that it's important for them to be really aware of what this shame is about. And as we talk about even these 4 circumstances, we'll be talking quite extensively about shame. And there are really basically 2 forms of shame. It's more complicated than this, but for our discussion today, there is toxic shame, which is the shame that is related to feeling that I'm a bad person. Then there's the healthy shame, or some people call it guilt, which is, I have done a bad thing, where toxic shame says, I am bad. And that then has a very deep implication then for his identity, and that can get in the way, as the parents especially now have to approach him with this awareness so that they're not responding to him with what they may feel originally is feeling shock, feeling some dismay because of what's happened. And they want to not convey this shock or dismay when they're discussing this with Bob, because he's going to then be reading them very closely. He's going to be looking in their eyes. He's going to be hearing the tone of their voice. And if they indicate to him in any way that they are deeply disappointed in him, and that they are shocked and they are feeling even shamed themselves, he's going to go underground. He's not going to share any more with them. In fact, he then will probably not share with them any more in further difficulties that he has if he has them ongoing. And so critical for them to keep this as light as they can, telling him and discussing with him how important it is to manage and control his behaviors, but also to help him understand and affirm, first of all, that he came forward to them, and to reinforce this with him, that this is the wonderful, beautiful, wonderful, good step that he took to come to them and become out of secrecy. Teaching him also, if they haven't already, the importance of the normal aspect of his sexuality, because this is where we can run into trouble with these youth especially, is that if we describe his behaviors as simply being bad and sinful, especially if he comes from a religious background, that these thoughts are bad, sinful, and wrong, as we say, then save them for someone you love, that's very confusing for an adolescent. And so being able to put it in the context that his sexual feelings are normal, even some of the experimentation that he's engaged in with looking at things and maybe even experimenting with masturbation, some of these things are very normal. Most of them are for adolescents in their maturation sexually. But to have them help him see that these are normal, natural feelings of sexual drive and feelings that he has, so that he doesn't carry then negative, unhealthy shame attached to his sexuality for the rest of his life. So those are the things that I think that the parents need to zero in on right at the initial stage.
Thank you, Dan. I fully support his comments. Is the sound on? Can you hear me? Okay, great. A couple of things that I would add. I think it's really important to see these issues as symptoms rather than the primary problem. And from that posture, we can be curious. One thing that I would be curious about is, how does this young person have access frequently to pornography, and what could be shored up and changed on that front to better protect this young person? Secondly, I'm curious about what mental health conditions may be exacerbating or fueling and driving the frequent use, which to my ear as a clinician lends itself to possible compulsivity. We know that 1 out of every 6 youth in the United States has at least one mental health condition, and 50% of lifetime mental illness arises by the age of 14. So this young man's 16, so it's very possible there's something going on there. 75% of mental illness arises by the age of 24, and that 14 to 24 cohort is critical in this battle of pornography that we are seeing and working together with. So I would really want to make sure that if there's anything in that mix, that it's being properly identified and diagnosed. We know from research that there's a strong correlation between certain mental health conditions and compulsive or addictive pornography use, such as ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, suicidality, bipolar disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. If these are not identified, this young person, I would worry, would struggle more than they need to establish long-term sobriety. And having worked with teens in the past, I know that this kind of intervention can not only be a game changer with the pornography use, but also sometimes life-saving. So those are the two things I would add. Regarding females, the response would be the same. I just would point out that females tend to be more severe when it comes to light, because we often have an assumption of purity, or we think that girls don't struggle or they're not vulnerable to this. So that's not true. Even though males may be more prone, we still need to work and educate and protect our young girls as well.
So what I heard was a couple of real simple takeaways for me. One is that the first response by parents or even an ecclesiastical leader has to be positive reinforcement for opening up about this. And it reminds me of the one line of a narrator in Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Nonetheless, should the sores of the sheep cause the shepherd to recoil? And the narrator says, well, no, because the shepherd loves the sheep. And it's the same way here. Those parents need to say, we're so proud of you, Bob, for having the courage to bring this forward. We're so proud of you for trusting us enough to raise this issue. And that needs to be the reflex response by whoever it is that is first approached. Is this young man is doing something right. He's beginning to lance an abscess, and that's the only way this puppy's going to heal. And so that initial response has to be welcoming, encouraging, and loving, and supportive. The other thing is that a question is, what else is going on in your life? Because the ones that are being approached aren't professionals. And so wondering what else is going on is trying to assess, is there something underlying? Instead of just going after the symptom, it's seeing, is there another thing that's going on? Is there depression? Is there other mental health conditions? And I think, how can I help, is a question that they could ask, because then it might get to, well, you could help me, just please monitor my computer, or just find things. But I think the key message here is that initial response has to be positive, good reinforcement, welcoming, non-condemning. Don't recoil at the sores of the sheep. Realize that we all have sores, we all have challenges. We're in this together, and that there's help. Thank you very much. The next one is this scenario. Joan is 23 years old. She's dating Eric. She feels like she's very much in love with him, and she thinks Eric loves her. Because he loves her, Eric wants to be totally honest with her and confesses a concern about his personal viewing of pornography. His viewing of pornography has been intermittent, usually triggered by stress. He's worked with ecclesiastical leaders and is in an addiction recovery program. Joan doesn't know whether she should run or stick around with her less than perfect boyfriend. So how should Joan think about this situation? And would you counsel her differently if, instead of Eric bringing it to light for her, if he had never told anybody and she inadvertently found this material on his computer, and as she confronts him or inquires about it, he's completely dismissive and saying that it's no big deal? Please.
So I would want this young woman to know that first, healing and recovery is possible. That can happen. And so this situation on the surface is not, in my view, an automatic deal breaker. But many of us in this room know that long-term recovery and sobriety, that some will underestimate the work that goes into establishing that. And so it's not automatically we're in the clear, given his forthrightness and the work he's done. So I would want her to know that solid recovery can actually be a strength and a source of resilience for a marriage if it's solid. But because there's times when it's not, for some people, here are things that I'd want her to watch for and to do. First, I'd want her to observe very carefully what Eric does to sort this out and work towards sobriety and recovery. Sobriety being what he stops doing, recovery being what he starts doing. This is where I see a lot of young adults get a problematic precedent set up. If she takes on prematurely this struggle as her own challenge, almost guaranteed this will set up a precedence of a lot of resentment for both of them long term. So I want her to step back and really observe what Eric will do. And she also has the right to ask a lot of questions, and I think she should ask some important questions to make an informed decision about next steps. Questions like, what exactly does intermittent use mean? What is the longest period of time that he's gone without turning to pornography? And given the mention of stress, what is he planning to do in a very specific way to mitigate or reduce stress going forward? Because if these two decide to marry, the transition into marriage is a source of stress. And it's not uncommon for this to escalate during that time.
Are you saying that marriage can be stressful?
I absolutely am saying that. Yeah, I'm a witness of that. Yes. You put me on record for that.
My wife is here, and she would attest to that as well.
Okay. So, learning to deal with those stress generally is going to be a really key thing, and then she needs to know what he's going to be doing for that going into this. Lastly, she also must be rigorously honest with herself and with Eric. Just like we're asking Eric to be rigorously honest with her, she too must be honest about whether she has the threshold and bandwidth to walk alongside someone in recovery. Not everybody can do that. And I want to say that's okay. We don't know her history. She may have grown up with parents in a marriage where this was an outward struggle or ended in divorce. She may have a history of sexual trauma. So she needs to be very open with him. And I'd want Eric to know if she decides that this is not something she can walk alongside, that may not have anything to do with Eric per se. This is not a direct rejection of Eric, but they do need to be open and honest about what both of them need as a partner that will serve them.
Yeah. As I'm thinking about this situation too, many circumstances run through my mind, as I'm sure it is with Jill, with exactly the same type of scenario. And I would just want to counsel Joan to not feel pressure to move quickly. She needs to take her time, because these young people sometimes feel like they need to be moving towards getting married quickly. She may even be getting a lot of pressure from Eric, feeling that perhaps this getting married will take care of his issue and his problem, which it won't. But she needs to be willing to have patience. And I would just say, see this as an adventure, and you need to be an observer of Eric's journey. And watch how he handles this. Watch how he deals with the stress that he's feeling at times, going through life circumstances together before she makes a final commitment, to see how does he deal with pressure? How does he deal with the stress and pressure of school? With the holidays coming up, how does he deal with those situations? And to be able to just observe and see how he's managing this, and the rigorous honesty is so critical, to see how open and honest he is with her, sharing not only his journey with managing his sexual desires and problems and issues, but also is he willing to open up and talk to her about his feelings, about his emotions, about his anxiety that he might be feeling, or his happiness and joy. Is he willing to be transparent with her in expressing how he does feel? And addressing the issue, if he hasn't disclosed this, if she discovers this, that raises a red flag, of course, for all of us, that he hasn't been willing to come forward. Now, that doesn't mean that he maybe wasn't willing to do it, and maybe he was waiting for the right time as well. So for her to be able to kind of explore that with him, understand why he hadn't discussed this with her, understand what his hesitancy is, what kind of shame he might be dealing with himself, This would also increase the importance of further time and not to be rushing into this quickly. Because we've learned that secrecy and lies are the lifeblood of this addiction. And so she needs to be aware of his willingness to be open and honest. And also just a counsel to her to follow her heart, kind of follow her intuition, her feelings about his journey. And she's going to be getting a lot of other people giving her advice and direction, some who are very fearful and maybe saying, if he's dealing with this at all, you need to run. But listen, thank them for their advice, but then listen to her own heart. If she's spiritually inclined, look for prayer and direction from the Spirit as well.
So what we heard here is that to make this a dichotomy, she either sticks around or she runs, is a false dichotomy, because it depends on multiple things. It depends on how she feels and her background, and that's critical. And it depends on how he behaves over time. And so there's something that we need to do to observe. But one of the other things that I heard is you're suggesting that marriage doesn't fix this problem. Is that right?
Correct.
So it's a false belief thinking that marriage will solve Eric's issues. It won't. And therefore it needs that further vetting and thinking about it. Thank you very much. Now the next case is about Karen. She's 45 years old. She's married, mother of 3, who has openly shared with her husband and ecclesiastical leaders a long history of viewing pornography. She's received counseling and participated in an addiction recovery program. She's done well, and what used to be daily pornography use has markedly decreased. In the past 2 years, she's viewed pornography only twice. Last week, while away on a business trip, she once again looked at porn. She's heartbroken and immediately shared the stumble with her husband. He remains supportive of her. She feels, though, that she's so broken that no one could love her. She feels that even God can't love her. How would you counsel Karen, and what counsel would you give her husband?
I'll go ahead and tackle this one. It's one that we see relatively frequently. More frequently it's the husband's issue, but this is very indicative also of what we're now seeing more prevalently, and that is that more and more women and girls are struggling with pornography issues and problems. First of all, if I were counseling with Karen, I would again, and I know we're kind of harping on this issue, but we need to also reinforce for her the fact that she came forward and volunteered this information to her husband, and that she did not then stay and keep the secret for even a short period of time. The longer it stays secret, the more problems are going to arise in the relationship, and it's going to increase his distrust in her. Him knowing that she came forward immediately and shared with him is going to be very, very critically important for their relationship, but also in working with Karen to let her know that this is the way to break through her toxic shame. She's feeling it already immensely. She already feels that she's not loved by God, and probably by her husband, probably feels again that now I've disappointed him again. Is he going to leave me? So she's wrought with a lot of emotional trauma with this. And so in counseling with her, we want to try to reduce that shame, and so that she does not then slide into what we've seen of depression and hopelessness. Gee, am I going to be able to ever overcome this? I thought I had it under control. Also letting her know that it's okay to feel some remorse. Feeling the toxic shame is different than feeling kind of a godly remorse that some of us refer it as. A sense that I have done something wrong here, I just need to now learn from it. And so there's a humble recognition that's really critical here, that it sounds like she's very much in a posture to be able to hear that from you as a friend or a therapist or an ecclesiastical leader, to reinforce her humility and that she's coming forth with this wanting to receive help. And also to help her understand the nature of these kinds of relapses. What I've seen frequently is that when a person has had a long period of time where they haven't relapsed, and she's only done this a couple of times in the last year, that there can be a tendency to get complacent and to stop working her program. The reason she probably got a handle on this is because she learned how to do dailies. She learned how to, as I call it, stoking the fire of her recovery, doing her daily routines, whatever that might be. And it's easy after a while when a person has gained some confidence and they're not struggling with the issue any longer to get a little bit complacent, maybe a lot, kind of back off on doing those things that kept their recovery alive. So I'd want to go with her and track what was happening before her trip. This probably didn't happen just in a vacuum on her trip. This was probably leading up for many, many weeks, if not months, by maybe her stopping doing some of her daily routines, maybe not handling her stresses adequately. I'm wondering if she gave a presentation at this conference. Was she really struggling with her anxiety and stress and worry about how she was going to present? All of these factors need to then be discussed so that she can now prepare in her adventure to get ready for her next trip. Because she may be tempted to quit her job or to say, I can't ever do this again because this is too difficult for me. But we need to help her understand how she can now prepare herself and not fall into that trap of dissociation from her sense of real power and strength. I call it maintaining that humble warrior heart of the recovering heart. Being humble to follow what counsel is needing to be given, but also having that sense of being a warrior to overcome and to fight and battle even the depression or sense of disdain that she may have for herself.
I would just add briefly that it sounds like the husband's doing well with this so far, which is great. But I'd want him to have his own therapeutic and pastoral support as well, because we know from research that men generally will struggle more with anything in the betrayal realm than females. And that's a whole other workshop that we won't get into here today. But it is important. I also think that he be involved in some of her pastoral and therapeutic meetings so that he's hearing what she's being told and counseled and encouraged to do in terms of accountability, and that he also has a forum to express any concerns and observations he's seeing. When someone's actively trying, working very hard to overcome this, I want to stress too that trying process must never be divorced or dissociated from accountability, healthy boundaries, and safety work, because these issues have far-reaching impact on family members. So the husband, I'd want to encourage him in making requests that would help him feel more steady and confident in her healing process.
So there have to be bounds or helps as she tries. As she tries to do this, she needs to get back in place those things that had helped her in the past. And there has to still be the accountability that's there. So I love this. When Nelson Mandela was given accolades and he'd feel a little bit embarrassed, one of the things he would frequently say is, I'm no saint. That is, unless a saint is a sinner who keeps on trying. And I love that because it says, though imperfect, I'm going to keep trying, but I have to keep trying in the right way. And we also have to then bear in mind that there's a hurt, and we cannot take her husband for granted. We need to also be worrying about him. But I think what's great about her is that she isn't keeping it a lie. She's actually being forthright, and again, compliments to her in that situation. This is from Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. Above all, do not lie to yourself. A man who lies to himself and listens to his own lies comes to a point where he does not discern any truth, either in himself or anywhere around him, and thus falls into disrespect towards himself and others. The pathway is this openness. It's keeping this thing open and exposed to air that will heal. Last one, Natalie is married to Joe, who had a major challenge with pornography. It was devastating for Natalie. Initially, she felt she was somehow to blame. She supported Joe as he worked with a therapist, and he markedly improved. As Joe gained control, he became happier and seemed to get back to his old self. Unfortunately, Natalie still feels permanently wounded. What would you do to help Natalie, and what would you tell Joe?
Well, I would first normalize and validate that it is more common than not for there to be a lag between his and her healing. That is very common, and that does not mean anything is wrong when you see that lag. Because what's happening is he's often feeling better than he has in years, sometimes since the time he was in his adolescence. She's now trying to metabolize and integrate an unexpected reality that for most we know is traumatic and at a minimum is deeply painful and a source of deep loss. So there's a lot she's having to organize and sort through this. Just this week on Tuesday, I met with a woman in her early 60s, and her story mirrored almost exactly this case example. And with today in mind, I asked her, what has this been like for you? Tell me openly. Don't hold back. What has this really been like for you? And this is what she said. She said, Jill, I feel like he got into one of those caterpillar bulldozers years ago without my knowledge and started bulldozing through a beautiful forest, uprooting vegetation, killing animals, and knocking down all the trees that have been growing for decades. And he's now stopped the bulldozing and wants me to celebrate him stopping. And meanwhile, I'm standing trying to make sense of the shock of this, and I'm standing amongst all these fallen trees. So I asked her, I leaned in and I said, if someone were to meet you right where you're at in that forest, what could someone do to help you? And she said, if my husband and others could acknowledge the fallen trees. And I thought that was such a profound statement. Now, as a therapist, practically how I interpret that is she needs a witness to this pain. Yes, we can celebrate and honor the good work that he's done to a beginning recovery path. That is a good and wonderful thing, but she can't be the cheerleader for that early on. And so what we do is we would invite her to write an impact letter. In a court of law, we call that a victim impact statement. It's very similar. We can't take the crime or the hurt away or the violation away, but we can at a minimum acknowledge the fallen trees. So she would read this letter in a supported setting, outlining what she is seeing, and then he in turn soon after would read an amends letter or an emotional restitution letter, there's different names for it, where he acknowledges the fallen trees. That witnessing is a powerful healing agent, very, very powerful. The sooner a husband or wife, if it's reversed, can lean into that and really look at the fallen trees and acknowledge, I've done this is painful, and this is what I'm doing to make sure that I never bulldoze like that ever again. It will expedite healing for both of them. Lastly, I want to make a point that the research is clear that betrayal trauma is associated with more depression, physical illness, and dissociation than other types of trauma. So I'd want her to be working with someone that understands the nuance of that and can help with what sounds, in the case example, like some cognitive distortions or stuck points that she legitimately is grappling with. And those can be overcome, but it takes someone to understand and be looking for those to help.
Yeah, and I'd concur with what Jill is saying here. Part of the counsel that I would give also is mainly to Joe, since in my practice I would be working mainly with the husband here. And for him to understand exactly what Jill has just said about his wife's journey. understanding her ups and downs, understanding her trauma that she's experienced. Because it's very common for a husband in this situation to get very frustrated because, gee, this is the best he's done in many, many years. He feels better than he's ever felt. He's been free of his addiction for maybe 6 months, and he's feeling like he's on good track. And yet his wife is still very, very traumatized by him coming home 15 minutes late from work. And he comes home and he says, what's wrong with you? Can't you forgive me? I've been doing so well. Are you sick? Sometimes I've heard them say, I feel like she's kind of crazy because she's responding the way she is. One day she'll love me, and the next day she'll pick a fight with me. And for him to understand the dynamics here, really very critical, because he needs to realize that he caused this trauma. And he then needs to have patience. He needs to realize that trust takes time and experience. You have to have experience with the trustworthy person for a long period of time for the trust to be established and rooted. And so when she gets close, when she feels close to him one day and they're maybe even physically intimate, it's very common for then the wife to feel vulnerable because she now feels like she's going to be too close and she may get hurt again. Now he can just hurt me so more deeply because I'm now letting down my guard, so I need to put up my guard. And so he needs to understand these dynamics and have a tremendous amount of patience and let her go through her journey.
It's been amazing to learn from Mr. Gray and Dr. Manning, and for their insights. It's helped me. I'm going to serve up one final question to them. Sometimes when we stress the ability to change, to repent, we inadvertently minimize the hurt a spouse has experienced. How do we balance forgiveness and mercy with genuine concern for the spouse?
That is the challenge. That is the challenge. And I witness a great deal of hurt and pain that comes from the grappling with where the fulcrum point is between mercy and justice with these delicate topics. And I think there's not one set point for that, but it takes sincere curiosity and exploration of how this has impacted both people. And I think including both people in the discussion of where those consequences need to be customized to both the strengths and goodness of what's happening and where there may need to be further accountability. But this is your question is spot on, Elder Renlund, because this is the growth edge, I think, right now that is hurting a lot of people.
And the biggest mistake that could be made for someone is to focus on just one or the other.
Yes.
It's recognizing we're dealing with generally two people, and we need to look at their situations. And if we exclude the other one from it and just look at one, we're going to make a mistake. Is that right?
Correct. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think there's also a differentiation between forgiveness and trust, where the mercy comes into play as well. That mercy or trust itself generally takes a longer period of time, like I was indicating. A person's heart can be changed, and forgiveness can take place even at an earlier place and stage than the trust. I have found that forgiveness generally is something that a person is able to kind of gravitate towards and understand, especially if there's a spiritual component to their journey, to understand the importance of forgiveness. But I also find that some people are encouraged to forgive too quickly, and that especially in some of the ecclesiastical interactions that these folks have, and it isn't that the ecclesiastical leader has done something wrong, but they many times will try to encourage forgiveness quickly before this person is able to work through their trauma and really recognize the pain that's occurred here. And then when forgiveness is worked on in a patient steady pace, then the trust eventually comes back as well.
It's really key that we not spiritually bypass, which means taking a true and good principle, but using that to almost short circuit a natural healing process. They can work together, but we shouldn't bypass real legitimate hurt and pain that takes time to heal. And I do think that for those in recovery, keeping an awareness alive of the consequences of what has occurred is part of the healing journey. Just to move forward and think that's in the past, I don't need to look at that anymore. I don't think that's spiritually what we're called on to do.
Let me summarize what I've heard. If you're not viewing pornography, don't start. If you're viewing pornography, stop. If you can't stop, get help. And if you have hurt somebody because of your viewing of pornography, acknowledge that you've bulldozed down trees. And if you don't have a broken heart and a contrite spirit and a desire to earn that trust back, you're not going to be able to facilitate that healing. And if you've been hurt by someone viewing pornography, part of your healing, it helps if the person who has viewed it has a broken heart and a contrite spirit, acknowledges the fallen trees. That could help, but your healing can in fact be independent on whatever he does, because you're looking to a higher source. You're looking to the healing that comes from the master healer himself, Jesus Christ. Now look at what Lisa has wrought. Look, it's still standing, and I've been bouncing and being nervous the whole time. But the impossible can be made possible if we have that hope ourselves, if we're looking to a higher source, and if we're surrounded by those that will encase and help us along. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Thank you. I think we should give them a round of applause.